everybody. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Hi, Professor Dershowitz. It's great to have you back again.
Thank you so much.
So I hope you're going to keep up with this because I understand you just got off of a flight from LA, so if it was me, I'd be tired.
Business as usual.
There you go. All right, so let's get started. Professor, as you know, every week we open our show with a special guest. With the European League just underway and the NBA season beginning this week, today we're honored to have a question from Israeli basketball legend Tal Brody, who was a former captain of Maccabi Tel Aviv and is an Israel Prize winner. Brody now serves as Israel's ambassador of goodwill, and he travels around the world to bring people together through sports. Let's hear what he has to ask.
Hi, Alan. Nice to see you again. I still have very nice memories of speaking at your class at Harvard and the great time that we had at going to the Boston Celtics game where you got season tickets, and that was a big thrill. And I understand Boston's going to have a good team this year. And I enjoy seeing you on the show. I enjoy seeing the programs of ILTV. I like their program where they're showing a lot of things of what's happening in Israel, the face of Israel. It's something which I do like on Facebook, where I have my good news from Israel. And there's a question I'd like to ask you. Basically, you know, I speak on the college campuses, and I've been seeing so much influence about anti-Israel and BDS, and really concerned about the students. I'm concerned about the amount of professors that seem to be against Israel. I'm very happy to see that the Jewish organizations are being reinforced a lot of times by the Kufi on campus move, Christians United for Israel. That's very something nice to see. But still, I really can't understand how the professors are not giving a balanced picture in the classrooms. And I'd like to get your opinion about that, and what to do to help to try to present the Jewish students on campus to be bullying. There's not any laws, and you know the states are making laws against BDS, but what about the universities?
Tal, thank you so much. You are one of the greatest voices for Israel. I go back so far in time that I remember when you were drafted by the National Basketball Association and could have been one of the great stars of American basketball, and you decided to make Aliyah, to make your life in Israel, to put Israel on the map athletically by winning the European Championship. And your voice is one that is widely respected on college campuses. And the reason why is because you make what I call the 80% case for Israel. You don't get involved in the details of do we approve of this settlement or that Israeli policy. You make the general overall case for why students and faculty should be supportive of the only democracy in the Middle East, the only force against major terrorism in the Middle East, America's strongest ally in the Middle East. And you put your finger right on the problem, and that is faculty members. And I have to tell you, it is not a majority of faculty members, it's a minority, but they're a very vocal minority, and they're bullies. Many of them use their position of influence as people who grade, people who give recommendations, to bully students into opposing Israel. And that has to stop. The students have been fantastic. Many of the students have stood up against professors, sometimes at great cost. The organizations that you mentioned and others are supportive of the students. For me, the greatest disappointment has been pro-Israel faculty who support Israel in their hearts, in their souls, in their synagogues, but not on the campus. These are people who don't have the courage of their convictions, and many of them have tenure. Yes, you can lose some credibility with some students if you express views that you yourselves personally believe supportive of Israel, but that's your obligation. With tenure comes an obligation to speak the truth to power, to stand up against bigots and bullies. And you mentioned bullying. You know, this whole safe space nonsense that we hear on campus, it's safe space for me, but not for thee. Jewish supporters of Israel, Christian supporters of Israel, they don't get safe spaces. They are not only psychologically and academically intimidated, but they are physically intimidated. And we hear also about trigger warnings and microaggressions. Again, it's only the hard left, the anti-Israel hard left, that wants trigger warnings and wants to stop microaggressions against them, while they engage in macroaggressions against Israel and Israeli students. So this double standard just has to end, and we have to call it out, and we have to be vocal, and we have to be assertive, and we have to make sure that the 80% on college campuses who are in the middle, not the 10% who are anti-Israel, not the 10% who are strongly pro-Israel, but the 80% with open minds in the middle, mostly among the student body, but among some faculty, hear the truth, hear from more people like Tal Brody. We need more women coming to American college campuses. We need more people of color. We need more people of North African background. We need a diverse array of defenders of Israel coming on the campus. We need to make the case on the social media. We need to make the case in every context in which students listen and even occasionally read, although we know students don't read as much these days as they used to. We are actually winning on many college campuses today, but the other side gets much more press attention and much more focus. So let's not be discouraged. Let's bring more people like Tal Brody to our campuses. Let's continue to tell the truth. And in the end, the truth will prevail.
Thanks, Professor. Now, let's hear some questions from our viewers. We have a special question from two young people. Daniel Topaz is from Israel, and Debbie Banki is originally from Brazil. And they want your take on whether the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the real primary issue that international leaders should be focusing on in the Middle East.
Hello, Professor Dershowitz. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Debbie.
I live in Tel Aviv.
And I'm originally from Brazil.
And we have a question for you regarding the conflict in the Middle East. We think there is a slight misconception about the conflict being mainly Israeli-Arabic, while the roots of the conflict, I think, are more Shiite-Sunnite, rooted inside the Islamic world. So we would love to hear what you think about it, and thank you very much.
Oh, I appreciate very much, Daniel and Debbie, your excellent question. I think you're right in part. Look, the Israel-Palestine conflict has been used as an excuse to unite Sunni and Shia against Israel. If there were no Israel, there'd be probably even greater conflicts between Sunni and Shia. But there were also conflicts within the Sunni branch of Islam, major conflicts, and those will not go away so easily. But I do think this is the perfect time for Israel to make a generous peace offer to the Palestinians. Yes, I agree that Benjamin Netanyahu, to his credit, has over and over again offered Abbas to come to Jerusalem, to come to jointly to Ramallah, that the road to peace is not through the United Nations, it's not through Washington, it's through Jerusalem and Ramallah. But this is a perfect time for Israel to make a generous offer, offers akin to those made 2000, 2001, and 2008. Why is this the perfect time? Because Israel is building alliances with some of the Sunni, particularly the Gulf states. They have a common enemy with Iran and, of course, with some of the other terrorist groups and Hamas and Hezbollah. And so I think many of the Sunni Arab countries see Israel as a source of stability, but they are pressured by their own street not to make a full and complete peace until the Jerusalem issue is solved. By the Jerusalem issue, I mean generally the Israel-Palestine issue, although for many religious Muslims, the issue focuses on Jerusalem. And of course, the UNESCO resolution doesn't help that at all. But the issue is largely an issue of conflict within the Arab and Muslim world, but Israel can do a great deal to solidify its position if it were to offer a very generous peace offer right now even if it were more generous than was originally intended, making peace right now with the Palestinians will create an enormous peace dividend for Israel and for the safety of the Middle East.
Now, speaking about those regional alliances, Iran supports Assad, who in turn supports Hezbollah in a terrorist alliance. Why isn't the world focusing on the threat that's posed by these regional alliances that are split on the Sunni-Shiite border in Islam, rather than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Because the world has a double standard when it comes to the nation state of the Jewish people. It has always focused much more attention on this tiny democracy surrounded by enemies. Disproportionate attention is paid. The world ignored Darfur, the world ignored Rwanda. The world is largely ignoring what's going on in Syria today. Hundreds of thousands of people with barrel bombs and chemical weapons, because there are no Jews involved. And when you don't have Jews involved, the world doesn't seem to care as much as when you have the nation state of the Jewish people. That's why the United Nations devotes so much of its attention to the nation state of the Jewish people and so little of its attention to genocides that are occurring all over the world. There's no good, rational answer to your excellent question. It's an answer based on bigotry.
All right, Professor. Now let's hear some questions from our viewer. Sasha Pomerance is from London, and she is concerned about international involvement when it comes to solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. U.S. President Barack Obama is on his way out of the White House, and he still wants to have had an impact on the issue. So Sasha wants your take on what Israel can expect from the American leader during his lame duck period.
Hi, Professor Dershowitz. I'm Sasha from England, and I have a question for you. I saw that you recently wrote in Boston Globe that Obama shouldn't advance the peace process during his lame duck period. But as we know, people are people, and he's going to want to achieve something before he leaves office. So is there a way to prevent this from happening, given the international pressure, like from the French and the UN, who are trying to move this forward?
That's a great question, and thank you for mentioning my Boston Globe article. I don't say that excuse me, President Obama should not be involved in the peace process. What I argue is that he shouldn't turn it over to the United Nations. That would be a disaster. Accepting the French resolution would be a disaster. I think that if the president wants to do something, he should simply urge the Palestinians to offer to accept what Israel had previously offered in 2000, 2001, and 2008. He should press the Palestinians to sit down with the Israelis and make peace now. But as he said, as Hillary Clinton has said, the road to peace is through Jerusalem, not through the United Nations. And I think if the United Nations gets its hands on this, it will make it much more difficult for a future president to participate effectively in the peace process, because the Palestinians at that point will have no reason to bargain or negotiate. They will falsely believe they can get a state through the United Nations. And that's why I wrote in the Boston Globe that it would ultimately be undemocratic for President Obama to hand it over to the United Nations in his lame duck period. Why undemocratic? Because the Senate doesn't approve of it. The House of Representatives doesn't approve of that. The American people don't approve of it. Probably the incoming president, whoever she or he is, doesn't approve of it. And when a lame duck president makes important decisions over the objections of the institutions of democracy, that president is acting undemocratically, and it should not be accepted. The president should have less power, not more power, during his lame duck period of transition. But this president has been threatening to take the matter to the United Nations. It would be a disastrous mistake, but it would tie the hands of the incoming president in a way that would make the peace process much more difficult. It will not give President Obama a legacy of peace. It would make President Obama the person who stood in the way of peace, who made peace more difficult, who made peace virtually impossible by allowing a UN resolution to encourage the Palestinians to seek statehood, not through negotiations and painful mutual sacrifices, but through unilateral action at the United Nations, at the International Criminal Court, or other places that do not have the power ultimately to produce peace in the Middle East. So I will fight hard against President Obama during his lame duck period. And I have also asked in my Boston Globe article for each of the two presidential candidates, Hillary Clinton, who I support, and Donald Trump, who I don't support, but I'd like each of them to announce that they oppose President Obama taking this kind of action after the presidential election. He doesn't have the courage to do it now, because if he did it now, it would hurt his candidate, Hillary Clinton. And so he's waiting until after the election when he thinks he can do it without any political consequences. That is the ultimate act of lack of democracy, and it is lack of accountability, and it would be a serious, serious mistake.
All right, Professor. Now let's turn to a question regarding a person whom you have known and debated. Shmuel Herenstein is a student from Lawrence, New York, and he wants your take on one of the most controversial rabbis and politicians in Israeli history, Rabbi Meir Kahane.
Hi, I'm Shmuel Herenstein, a student from Lawrence, New York. 25 years after the death of Rav Meir Kahane, his name still evokes powerful emotions. As one of his interlocutors, has your ideology been influenced in the aftermath of your debate?
Well, thank you, Shmuel. As you know, I knew Meir Kahane from the time I was a young child. Our parents knew each other. He was the captain of the debating team at Brooklyn Talmudical Academy 4 years before I was the captain of the debating team, followed by Shlomo Riskin, who then became the captain of the debating team, Yitz Greenberg, a long history of debate at Brooklyn Talmudical Academy and Zionism. Meir Kahane was a brilliant man. I actually spoke to him. He was killed on a Monday night. I spoke to him the Thursday night before he was killed. He sought my assistance, my legal assistance, in getting Brandeis to allow him to speak on their campus. They had banned him from speaking on their campus. Many campuses banned him. The same campuses that today allow the most radical, the most anti-Semitic, the most anti-Zionist speakers to speak on campus. Many of the same campuses banned Meir Kahane because he advocated violence under certain circumstances. I think his tactics were all wrong. I think his tactics of violence against the Soviet Union backfired. I think his tactics of violence against Arabs, whether in Israel or in the United States, were counterproductive. He did not represent the mainstream Jewish issues. And as I've said many times, he asked the right questions, but I think he came up with the wrong answers. He was not in favor of the two-state solution. He wanted there to be only a Jewish state based on biblical principles in all of the West Bank and current Israel. He was not somebody who was prepared to compromise in the interests of peace. The tragedy is how he died, and that was a great tragedy. But his views, I think, have generally had a negative impact, both in Israel and in the United States. I understand the passion from which he spoke and the excellent questions he raised. As you might know, we debated on 2 or 3 occasions. I was willing to debate him when no other, quote, Jewish leader was prepared to debate him. We debated first at Avi Weiss's shul in Riverdale, and then we debated on the radio, and then we debated in Boston. Who won the debate is obviously a matter of opinion, but that's not important. What's important, I think, is that the Israel-Palestine conflict hopefully can be resolved without the need for the kind of violence that Rabbi Kahane often advocated. So again, he was a very important person who asked very important questions, but I think his tactics, strategy, and answers to the question were not in the interest, ultimately, of Zionism and the Jewish community.
Professor, now I'd like to get a little bit more personal and ask you about the feelings you have when you think about the Jewish Defense League. You once said that you cried upon realizing that you had gotten Sheldon Siegel acquitted, who had been accused of making a bomb that was set off in the Manhattan office of Sol Horak and ended up killing an innocent woman. But on the other hand, the case also allowed you to challenge what you saw as a systematic unconstitutionality in the government's handling of informers. How do you feel today, looking back on your first criminal case?
Well, thank you for that question. It really brings me back to 1973 when I was a young law professor at Harvard. I had been the youngest professor at the school's history, but I had never practiced law. And I was completely inexperienced as a lawyer. And Sheldon Siegel grew up in my neighborhood. And his family and friends called me and said, look, he can't get a real lawyer. Nobody's willing to defend him. Would you be willing to defend him free without, any fees? And I said I would. And it became my first case. And it really changed my life in many ways. It gave me a taste of the law. I managed to win not only for Sheldon Siegel, but for Meir Kahane and for all the members of the Jewish Defense League who had been charged with the murder of this innocent woman, Iris Cones. It was a tragic, tragic outcome. It wasn't intended. The Jewish Defense League intended it to be a smoke bomb to just frighten Saul Urach and the people who worked in his office, who were bringing Soviet talent to Carnegie Hall. And the JDL slogan was bombs for balalaikas, bullets for ballerinas, something I fundamentally disagreed with. But as the result of winning the case for the JDL, I became very actively involved in Soviet Jewry because I wanted to show the JDL that there was another way of helping Soviet Jewry, another way of bringing out so many people from under the oppression, that we didn't need to fight tyranny with the violence against innocent people, that it would be much better to use diplomatic, economic, political, legal resources. And we did that. It took a long time, but ultimately 1 million Jews left the Soviet Union for Israel. Many hundreds of thousands of them left for the United States. It was a transformative event, both in Zionism and the history of the Jewish people. And so, I always have mixed feelings toward the Jewish Defense League, and I always have very positive feelings toward the Soviet Jewry movement.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today, unfortunately. Thanks for your time, Professor. I also want to thank all of our guests, especially Israel's legendary basketball star, Tal Brody. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to iltv.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.